These two dungeon games have been developed by massive studios, and I bet you never knew about this until now. And the first one we have here is Treasure Quest. Have you heard of that? If you played back then, maybe you have, maybe you haven't. And I have a banana out of my head right now. I don't know why. Now, this game has been made by the game studio Noisy Games. Now, that may ring a bell, or may not ring a bell. Now, if it doesn't, don't worry, I'll cover what games they have made later. But first, let's talk a little bit over about this game. Now, Treasure Quest was basically a sort of dungeon game, though I don't know if it was as well as others. Well, because first of all, my spell right here is basically just a force field that just goes back and pushes back enemies, which seems a little overpowered, but doesn't feel really creative at all. But this game was a lot more popular in the year 2020, and I just died immediately. Now, Treasure Quest does still have a decent, well, not really, amount of players around, going between 200 to 100 players, which isn't bad. It's surprisingly kind of close to the Arcane Conquest player count, which is it feels a little bit weird saying that. But the game did reach a little bit of a peak back in the year 2020, even reaching 5,000 players at some point. It was still doing pretty good, but unfortunately, it has not been receiving, well, as much content or players recently. Now, you may be wondering, what games does Noisy Games own besides Treasure Quest? Now, if we go to their groups here, and we scroll a little bit down, Rivals. Yep, Treasure Quest is the same owners of the owners of Rivals. That is absolutely crazy. Now, I don't think Rivals needs an introduction, since by the time of recording this video, the game has over 100,000 players, which is absolutely crazy. So the game is a lot more popular, and well, it seems most of the community, well, about Noisy Games is mostly about, well, this game itself, and well, not a surprise to be honest, but if we look at the other games that this Noisy Games has as well, which are the following. Another of their more popular games, well, not as popular, not even close to Rivals, is Super Golf. Yeah, did you know they also made Super Golf? It is another game that I have actually not played a little bit before, but it's honestly interesting this game that made a dungeon game known as Treasure Quest not only made Super Golf, but made Rivals. And a lot of other games that I'm just going to show you real quick. They aren't as popular, but they are still games they have made. And another game that they have made that has around similar to the amount of players that Treasure Quest have is a game called Noodle Arms, which honestly, you've probably never heard of this before. I kind of find this a little bit funny, but yeah, the rest of the games do not really have any more players. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the other dungeon game. Now, before we move on to the next one, looking in the Noisy Games Discord, there's still discussions or a channel to be able to discuss related things to Treasure Quest, and including a giveaway that was yesterday. So there's still a tiny bit community here, but there's just not as many as before. But it's still kind of nice seeing that there's still a community towards this, even though the main thing will be about Rivals because that's their biggest game. Now, for real, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The next game we have here is Rumble Quest. Now, Rumble Quest does actually have a little bit less popularity than Treasure Quest, but it was made by Rumble Studios. Has that rung a bell for you yet? Well, if it hasn't, then I'll run over the games they have made later. First, let's talk a bit about Rumble Quest. Rumble Quest was another style dungeon game like this, but it did have unique different mechanics. For example, this little map right here in the top right. So I think that's pretty cool, and a game that actually used to be nearly as popular as Treasure Quest back then, but unfortunately has lost its popularity. Most of these games were made during the 2020 era when Dungeon Quest was popular, since that's what the popular game studios wanted to work on and focus on in general. Unfortunately, this game did not get that much development. It got discontinued really quickly after only a few updates, which is really unfortunate, and I've heard a lot of people miss this game. But let's go ahead and talk about RumbleQuest's player count. Now, RumbleQuest right now is averaging between 100 and going as low between like 25. Now, back then, it hit the peak of around 2,000 players, not as much as Treasure Quest, but it still was a lot nonetheless. But now, as the time went on, it went lower and lower and lower and lower, hanged around here around 200, 300 for a while, and then under 100, and that's where it's been today. The visits now are non-existent. Back then, it was 300,000 per day, and now it's scratching a 20,000. Now, what games have Rumble Studios have made? Well, surprisingly, there is a few games that were really popular before, which let's go ahead and check out the other games that Rumble Studios have made besides RumbleQuest. The first game Rumble Studios have made is Pet Catchers. Do you remember this game? Maybe you don't. This game, it was a similar game to Pet Simulator, but more free-to-play based. Now, I didn't play this game a lot, as you can see, I have nothing. But this game was actually very popular at some time. But unfortunately, it didn't do very well. But there is two other games that Rumble Studios made that were a lot more well known, which let's go ahead and look at them. The next game is Mining Simulator. Do you remember Mining Simulator? This game, actually, I did not play this a lot, but this game was really popular back then. It was played by thousands of players. So it was honestly a really well-known game, and you might know this game. Even if you didn't play it, you still may have known of the game, since it was still a really popular game in Roblox back then. But that's not the only popular game they made. They made another one which, to be honest, arguably, I think is even more well known than Mining Simulator. And that game is Bubble Gum Simulator. Do you remember Bubble Gum Simulator? I sure do. I remember playing this way back then. I even have the OG bubbling title. Now, this game, you could actually go up and go explore some islands. For example, this island that I just jumped to right here, and you could get coins, get some pets, and a lot of cool stuff. Now, I did actually end up not playing this game anymore a long time ago, but this game used to be extremely popular amongst the players and one of the most popular simulators. And if there's ever a part to this, I'm sure this would become one of the most popular simulators, at least for some time, because how much players are awaiting of this simulator. So, yeah, would you imagine the creators of Rumble Studios, who created RumbleQuest, also created Bubblegum Simulator, and not only created Bubblegum Simulator, but also created Pet Catchers and a bunch of other more popular games, which I just find so shocking. Well, those were two dungeon games that were made by Mass Studios. Did you remember any of them or recognize them when you played back then? Or did you even know of these before even watching this video? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. YouTube says you'll like this video right over here, and waddle out, my friends.